Hello, welcome to today's topic on causal loop diagram. The causal loop diagram is one of the important tools used in the approach of system dynamics. Actually, it's a very useful tool to visually represent the dynamic interrelationship within a system. It is also used to test and clarify our thinking, specifically on the concept of systems thinking. Following are the components of a causal loop diagram. First and foremost, it has what we call as the variables. Variables are actually something that varies over time. Examples of this probably would be your money in the bank, which is not constant, of course. Once we withdraw something from your account, then it changes, it decreases. And once we deposit something into the account, the money in the bank increases. Variables could also refer to the amount of food in our fridge. Today it might be full, and for the succeeding days it might be empty. So those are what we call as variables. A causal loop diagram also has arrows. These arrows represent the influence between variables, meaning it refers to causality. Variable A can be able to influence variable B. Hence, we put an arrow between them to signify that A affects B. A causal loop diagram also has polarity. It could be either positive or negative. A positive sign or a plus sign or an S sign indicates that A and B change in the same direction. So if we have an arrow between A and B and we put a positive sign below it, it means that if A increases, B also increases. So we could go back to the example of the money in the bank. If you increase your deposits, then the money on the bank also increases. So in this particular example, the polarity here is positive or a plus sign. On the opposite, a negative sign means that A and B changes in the opposite direction. For example, if you increase A, then B would decrease. And so we put a negative sign. We can have more examples of that later. A causal loop diagram also has what we call as feedback loops. These feedback loops are of two types: the balancing loop or the reinforcing loop. Balancing is symbolized by the letter B, and the reinforcing loop is symbolized by the letter R. A causal loop diagram also has symbol of delay, or the two bars inserted into the arrows. This means that the effect is delayed. This graphics here represents the basic causal loop diagram notations. The first one is read as A causes B with positive polarity. This means, in layman's terms, that as A increases, B also increases. A classic example would be money in the bank. As your deposit increases, the money in your bank also increases. Contrary to that is the second notation. This means that W causes Z with negative polarity. This means that as W increases, then Z decreases, and vice versa. Meaning, if W decreases, then Z also increases. We could probably think of an example such as the amount of water that we take out from the ground. The more water we extract from the ground, then the amount of water from the reservoir would also decrease. In the third notation, we see two vertical bars in the arrow. This means as X causes Y with positive polarity, however, there is some certain delay between this causality. For example, we might think of X as the number of schools being built, and Y would be the literacy rate of a certain area. And we all know that as we increase the number of schools in a certain area, then probably we can be able to increase also the literacy rate in that particular area. Literacy rate meaning the number or percentage of people who are able to read and write. But that doesn't mean that this would happen overnight. Meaning, it's highly unlikely that if we build one school today, the literacy rate would also increase tomorrow or tonight. There's a certain delay, probably in another 5 years or in 10 years, but not instantaneously. That's why we put in two vertical bars in the arrow to symbolize that delay. And then the next symbol is a circular arrow with the letter R in the center and the number 1. R here represents reinforcing feedback loop or the positive feedback. Later on, in our causal loop diagrams, we might see a certain loop in the relationship or a circle in the relationship. Then we should be able to identify if it's a reinforcing feedback or a balancing feedback, which is the last one in our notation or symbols. As we go further, we look at how or what causal loop diagram should look like. So in this particular example at the center, this is a causal loop diagram which shows the relationship on conservation efforts and how it creates positive results. Meaning, if you do conservation activities, it creates positive results. Hence the S here, which is also the alternative symbol for the positive sign. And then when we see positive results, it creates the awareness of this on the people, which is also a positive effect. And this awareness creates also a positive effect in the sense of public support for conservation efforts. In this particular example, on water conservation. And this public support also creates more positive effect on the efforts of conservation. So in this case, this is a reinforcing feedback loop. Hence, we have the R symbol at the center. So in this particular slide, we'll see the different parts of this causal loop diagram. So number 1 is the variable, which are the words which are written, these 4 particular variables. And number 2 is the arrows. So the arrows represent the effect of one variable to another variable. And this arrow also has a sign. It could be positive or S or negative or O. And then at the center, we see the type of loop. And as we all know, it could either be R for reinforcing or B for balancing. In this particular example, this is R or reinforcing because the feedback loop encourages more in terms of growth. Under that, the standards would actually say that under that symbol for either reinforcing or balancing, we should put the name of that loop. In this case, this refers to word of mouth.